Crack you, and by the following.
D.A. Davidson and Company, an investment firm serving the individual investor since 1935.
Good evening. I'm Ray Suarez. Jim Lehrer is away. On the NewsHour tonight, American views on the crisis in Indonesia, a Terrence Smith report on the latest clash between the media and the law. Margaret Warner discusses the week's politics with Mark Shields and Paul Gigot, and Gwen Eiffel asks 4 heads of military colleges what they think Campaign 2000 should be about. It all follows our summary of the news this Friday.
The biggest obstacle to feeding the world is not the food supply, it's just politics. Who is dedicated to opening the borders to get food to the people who need it?
This program is made possible in part by a grant from Travelers Insurance.
And by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by the annual financial support from viewers like you.
6 rockets exploded today near the U.S. Embassy and a United Nations building in Pakistan's capital, Islamabad. There were no Americans among the 6 people injured, and no one claimed responsibility for the attack. It came days before a UN deadline for Pakistan's neighbor, Afghanistan, to turn over suspected terrorist Osama bin Laden. Afghanistan's rulers have said they will not force bin Laden to leave. In Washington, State Department spokesman James Rubin said the Pakistan attacks won't change anything.
Let me be clear that sanctions will go into effect on November 14th, just 3 days from now, if the Taliban does not assist in bringing Osama bin Laden to justice. That is our view. With respect to this incident, we are aware of a public statement by the leader of the Taliban, Mullah Omar, condemning the attack and denying any responsibility for them.
Bin Laden is wanted in the U.S. for allegedly masterminding the bombings of 2 American embassies in Africa last year. Pakistan's new military ruler offered to mediate the dispute over bin Laden, and in Afghanistan today at least 3 people were wounded in the capital, Kabul, when a powerful bomb detonated outside a mosque. The car of a member of the ruling Taliban militia was damaged, but he was not injured. Authorities said it was unclear if the official was the target. The Islamic fundamentalist Taliban rule about 90% of Afghanistan. They're fighting northern-based opposition groups for the remainder. A strong earthquake rocked western Turkey today. At least 17 people were killed, hundreds injured, as buildings toppled and fires broke out. The magnitude was 7.2 on the Richter scale. Survivors flooded into the streets, fearing aftershocks. The Turkish government rushed rescue and medical teams to the area. The tremor struck 115 miles east of Istanbul, in an area devastated by a massive 7.4 quake last August that killed at least 17,000 people. President Clinton said today the United States would help Indonesia fight corruption. He spoke before an Oval Office meeting with Indonesia's first democratically elected president, Abdurrahman Wahid. It was his first official visit to the United States since taking office last month. Wahid said he's planning to pardon his predecessor, former President Suharto, who's currently under investigation for allegedly plundering billions from Indonesia's treasury. President Clinton said this.
The decision, first of all, is one for the Indonesian people and government to make. And I think every country has to decide how to resolve the tension between the pursuit of a particular case and the desire for the reconciliation of people and to go forward. And I think that that's a decision the president has to make, and we ought to support anything that he's trying to do to build democracy and to take Indonesia into the future.
We'll have more on Indonesia right after this news summary. Mr. Clinton also signed the big Financial Services Reform Act today. It lifts Depression-era restraints that separated the banking, insurance, and securities industries. The new law allows such firms to offer a broad range of investment-related products and services. The flight data recorder of the Egypt Air 990 offered still more mystery today. James Hall, chairman of the National Transportation Safety Board, said the recorder showed the engines cut off as the Boeing 767 made a controlled plunge from 33,000 to 17,000 feet. Then it somehow climbed back to 24,000 feet before making the final dive into the Atlantic. All 217 people aboard perished. Hall said he hoped the cockpit voice recorder would help solve the riddle. Recovery crews resumed their search for the recorder, but technical problems cut the effort short. A United Nations aid plane crashed in Kosovo today. The World Food Program flight was carrying 24 people. There appeared to be no survivors. Searchers found wreckage from the plane several hours after it was reported missing. It was near the end of a routine food delivery flight from Rome to Kosovo. The debris was found in a mining area north of Pristina. Rescue teams in Italy have so far pulled 34 bodies and one survivor from the ruins of a 6-story apartment building that collapsed yesterday in the city of Foggia. 27 more victims are believed buried. 16 residents got out before the building caved in. A smoldering fire burned today, apparently ignited by cars parked in the basement garage. That's it for the news summary tonight. Now it's on to an update on Indonesia, press freedom on trial, Shields and Jago, and Agenda 2000. The new leader of the world's 4th largest country visits Washington. We start with a look at the turbulent year leading up to this meeting. Last month, Indonesia's People's Consultative Assembly elected a Muslim political leader to be the country's next president. Abdul Rahman Wahid replaced B.J. Habibie, who was appointed last year when President Suharto resigned after more than 30 years as Indonesia's ruler. The National Assembly chose Wahid to be president 6 months after the country's first freely contested and fair elections in 54 years of independence. The winner in the popular election was Megawati Soekarno-Putri, daughter of Indonesia's first president, Sukarno. When the assembly rejected Megawati, heavy rioting began in the capital, Jakarta, and on the island of Bali, a Megawati stronghold. Then, in a dramatic surprise, the new president named Megawati as his vice president. His choice was ratified by the parliament, this time setting off happy gatherings. Wahid is 59 and frail. He's had 2 strokes and is almost blind. If he cannot fulfill his 5-year term, Megawati would become president. The new leaders take over a country torn by political and economic troubles. Indonesia's troops came home in humiliation from the 24-year occupation of East Timor, and some generals could face war crimes indictments after violence that racked the island after the vote for independence. Hundreds of East Timorese were killed, tens of thousands more were scattered and left homeless, and the territory is a charred ruin. The United States suspended aid and broke military ties with Indonesia in September. United Nations peacekeepers are now in place to maintain order on East Timor, and the island is now formally under UN control. But even as Indonesia was dealing with the loss of East Timor, a former Portuguese colony, it faced insurrection in other provinces, like ethnically distinct Aceh and Irian Jaya. This week, President Wahid raised the possibility of a Timor-style referendum on the future of Aceh, one of the richest parts of Indonesia, and that provoked pro-independence demonstrations and outbreaks of violence. 2 weeks ago, Wahid unveiled what he called a national unity cabinet. The 35-member cabinet includes Indonesia's first civilian defense minister since the 1950s. Indonesia's former defense minister, General Wiranto, a key figure of the old regime, was given a lesser post in the new administration. Despite Wahid's efforts at compromise and inclusion, the announcement of the coalition government did not lift Indonesian financial markets. The nation of 210 million had seen millions rise from poverty to middle class, only to fall back into poverty during the financial crisis of 1997. The new government faces demands from international organizations and lenders to reform its banks and other financial institutions, many of them accused of crony capitalism during the Suharto era. Rebuilding the economy and repatriating refugees back to East Timor were the 2 main issues Wahid and President Clinton discussed in their hour conversation at the White House earlier today. For more, we get two views. Paul Wolfowitz was ambassador to Indonesia during the Reagan administration. He's currently the dean of the Paul Nitze School of Advanced International Studies at Johns Hopkins University. And Adam Schwartz is a consultant and former journalist, author of a new book, A Nation in Waiting, Indonesia's Search for Stability. Both were in Indonesia 3 weeks ago when Abdul Rahman Wahid was elected president. Adam Schwartz, has the new president been able to put a stamp on the country, make clear his authority, and get some calm?
He certainly has. Well, except for the last part, I'm not sure things are quite as calm as he would like. But in terms of giving a sense of having turned a new page, he's certainly done that in his treatment of the military, and as your opening piece had pointed out, putting in a civilian as a defense minister, the inclusion of numerous parties in his cabinet, which is something we haven't seen before in Indonesia, and in his comments in reaching out to the outer islands of Indonesia and trying to develop a sense of inclusiveness. All of these are welcome and new in Indonesia.
Paul Wolfowitz, you've been quoted as someone who's praised the new President Wahid as having the temperament necessary for this time in the country's history. Tell us more about him.
I think it's more than just temperament. He has an incredible vision. This is a man who's now the president of the country with the largest Muslim population in the world. For more than a dozen years, he's been the leader of the largest Muslim organization in that country with some 30 million very devoted followers. And he is as strong an apostle of the idea of religious tolerance as you could find anywhere in the world. He went out of his way 5 days in office to go and visit a Hindu temple in Bali, participate in Hindu prayers, and talk about the fact that the Ministry of Religious Affairs has to stop being the ministry of only one religion, i.e. Islam, his religion, become the religion of all the people of Indonesia. It's a very important message because it's crucial to building national unity. It's crucial to getting the ethnic Chinese who've been persecuted for so long to come back. But it's also part of his sense of mission in life. He believes with a passion that Islam is completely consistent with democracy and human rights and freedom, and is very upset at Muslims who interpret a different way.
But he's not out of step with his own country. I mean, Indonesia's brand of Islam is a little different from those.
That's absolutely right. But he's probably the most outstanding spokesman you could find for it. And I'd say one other thing. I think he has a keen sense of strategy. I think he realizes, for example, that one of his biggest problems is how to bring the military under civilian control. He knows he has to do it. He's taken some decisive steps to start doing that by naming a civilian defense minister, by putting an admiral instead of an army general in charge of the military, by moving a lot of people around in personnel positions in an interesting way. He also knows he can't do it unless he has allies in the military. He knows you can't do everything all at once. So I think the problems they face, as you correctly showed in your introduction, are just staggering. They're almost superhuman. But all I can say is this man, blind though he is, and in certain ways frail, has unbelievable mental energy and vitality. And if the country has a chance with anybody, I think it's with him.
Adam Schwartz, are you as optimistic as the ambassador seems to be about President Wahid's declawing of the military?
I am. I mean, I share Paul's view on both President Wahid's vision and his energy and his objectives, what he intends to do. I think we would both agree that the problems and the challenges are enormous, and it's certainly not going to be an easy ride. The military is clearly, its power is on the decline. If we look at it, say, from where we were in 2 months ago, it was a consensus view that a military figure would be the vice president, if not the president. That did not happen, and then through the various steps that Paul just mentioned, clearly the military has seen its power recede. Having said that, I don't think anybody would deny that the military retains enough influence to, if not retake power down the road, if things take a turn for the worse. It certainly has the influence to undermine and to undercut the effectiveness of the government of President Wahid, and that's why on a number of different areas, corruption being one of them, and the prosecution of former President Suharto being another, there's certainly some compromises and some deals that are going to have to be made for the sake of maintaining the effectiveness of his government.
Well, just a few months ago, Ambassador, the pundits were saying that one way to get the military to show its hand was to promise Aceh a referendum, the kind that East Timor had. Yet here's President Wahid saying that such a thing is possible, even likely.
Well, he's also saying it's not ready yet. We need time. I think he's trying to deal with an incredibly difficult situation. I think he realizes that he can't keep Aceh in Indonesia by force, and therefore, in principle, he concedes that they have a right to choose. But he's going to be doing everything between now and whenever that referendum happens to persuade them that the right choice is to stay in Indonesia. And I think the first step, in a way, is 1 million people in the streets of the capital of Aceh demonstrating for independence. On the one hand, that makes people scared. Maybe the country's falling apart. But they wake up the next morning and they notice the military was not called out, people were not shot. It may be a different kind of government. And if there's any hope of resolving this issue peacefully, it has to be through backing off with military force, giving the people in Aceh enormous autonomy. It's a terribly big gamble, but I think it's the only one that might work.
Well, there's a rebel army in the bush in Irian Jaya as well. Why shouldn't they press their demands even harder?
Well, they will, but each of these situations is different, and to be honest, I don't think the opposition in Irian Jaya is anything like the level of East Timor, or for that matter, Aceh. But again, they're going to have to work on it, and one of the interesting things he did was assign his vice president, Megawati, the task of working with some of the provinces like Irian Jaya, where she has, I think, a certain special appeal to people. And again, it's going to be to try to convince the bulk of people that they're better off staying within Indonesia.
Adam Schwartz, a lot of the news from Indonesia over the last couple of weeks, barring this violence, has been pretty reassuring, at least in the business sense. Yet there are no, thumbs up in the marketplace for this country. No signs of faith, big faith yet, that it's back on its feet.
Not yet, but I would say that relative to where we were a month ago, the mood is certainly brighter and more optimistic in the markets. There is now a sense that things can get better, which is not a sense we had a month or 2 months ago, where Indonesians in general and the markets in particular were sort of filled with gloom and foreboding. The question going forward for the economy remains as it has been, is can there be sustained political stability in Indonesia? Now, with the assumption of power by President Wahid, we have the prospect of that happening. It doesn't mean it's going to happen, and I think the markets are waiting to see whether it's going to happen. And on this bigger issue that we've been talking about in terms of Aceh and Irian Jaya, will Indonesia stay together? Will Indonesia remain as the Indonesia as we know it? It's going to be a long process to convince people that is the case, that President Wahid has what it takes to deal with those problems, that his health will hold out, that he can maintain the support and unity and cohesion of this cabinet that will work effectively. So, leaving aside the specifics of the economic reform agenda, such as corporate and bank restructuring. So it's a long agenda. But I would say that the markets are now in an optimistic poise, waiting to go forward, waiting to have a few more things demonstrated, rather than having thrown up their arms and given up on the place, which I think would have been more a general description of the way things were a month or two ago.
Should investors be reassured by the pardon of Suharto?
Well, again, it depends on how that is sort of interpreted. I think the way gradually it will be interpreted is what is going, again, to bring stability and peace and a sense of reconciliation and some forward momentum in the politics of Indonesia.
Let me get a quick read on that same question from the ambassador. This pardon, setting the House in order, just part of the inevitable process?
Well, as he said in his meeting in the White House today, or after the meeting, he said there were two things. Suharto was their president. That has to be respected, and he made it very clear last night. The children are a different matter. If I were the children, I'd be looking for residence elsewhere. But secondly, the reality is that Suharto has still a lot of influence, a lot of capability to do mischief. He was pretty explicit about that. He doesn't want to see that unleashed. There's a third thing, which he didn't say, but which I suspect is in the back of his mind. And this man is a strategist. He thinks several steps ahead like a chess player. I think before you get to a pardon, you're going to see some kind of arrangement for restitution. That is to say, some degree of financial compensation to the people of Indonesia. That's part of his notion of how Islamic forgiveness is earned.
Paul Wolfowitz, Adam Schwartz, thanks for being with us.
Well, thank you.
court battle between Texas prosecutors and CBS News ended this week. Media correspondent Terrence Smith has the story.
After a series of demands and threats of jail time backed by the state judge, one federal and several local prosecutors got what they wanted from CBS.
What Texas prosecutors wanted was the entire text of an interview that anchorman Dan Rather had conducted with Sean Allen Berry, the third defendant in the dragging death trial of James Byrd, Jr. The other two defendants were found guilty of capital murder and have been sentenced to death. Prosecutors got the unedited transcript, but so did the public. CBS News posted the full transcript on its website. First Amendment lawyer Bruce Sanford.
CBS reached the end of the line in this case in Texas, and they made a decision to respect the law rulings as they had come down, to release the transcript on the internet, a very clever use of the internet, to make public, essentially, what the prosecutors had been asking for. And so all of us can decide whether the prosecutors really had much of an argument here.
Prosecutors argued that in the edited interview aired on 60 Minutes 2 on September 28th, Berry contradicted statements he had given earlier to police. They needed the entire transcript, they said, to check for further inconsistencies. Nonetheless, CBS refused.
What really bothers me about it is it's not right. My God, it's not right. Any corporation, any private individual, any officer, anybody else would be required to turn over an interview with a defendant. It's not right for them to keep that interview and not turn it over to this jury.
Prosecutors worked through 2 states to get tapes and transcripts. In Texas, they subpoenaed the entire interview from Dallas-based CBS producer Mary Mapes, threatening her with jail if she didn't turn over the material. In New York, Dan Rather was subpoenaed to turn over the tapes and testify in Sean Berry's trial. Rather had this to say on his day in court.
I believe in the rule of law deeply and completely. And that's the reason we're here today, because an important principle is involved. And it's the principle of the public's right, not the press, but the public's right to have a free and independent press.
In order to foster a free and independent press, 31 states have set up protections for journalists called shield laws. They protect journalists from having to disclose confidential sources or having to hand over unpublished or unaired information when there is no compelling reason for the courts to have it. Texas does not have a shield law. Attorney Sanford says journalists aren't seeking to be above the law, just independent of the law.
They don't take pictures or gather information and then trade it with the police or trade it with prosecutors. They don't do things like that because if they did, they would never get the interviews from whistleblowers, from watchdogs on government, from people who want to share information with them that are terribly afraid of retribution by the government.
After CBS gave in and turned over the transcript Wednesday, all the subpoenas were dropped. Joining us now are lawyers for the prosecution and for CBS. Prosecutor Guy James Gray is the criminal district attorney of Jasper County. And First Amendment specialist Floyd Abrams represented Dan Rather and CBS in New York. Welcome to you both. Mr. Gray, why was it essential to have the entire Dan Rather interview, and what did you learn from it that was new or different?
Well, the first thing is rules of evidence. There was a portion of the aired interview that we needed to get into evidence. Under our rules, we can't do that unless we have a full unedited version. So by getting that, we were able to air a portion where Berry talks about the shoes that King was wearing, and we use it to try to establish at least that King was a passenger and Berry was the driver. What was the second part of your question?
Well, when you got the full and unedited version, did you discover anything new or different?
Actually, I got it Tuesday, and I haven't had time to read through it yet. But we needed it to introduce into evidence the portion about the sandals, and we introduced the whole transcript, and I'll go through it this weekend. I know there are a couple of things that we'll use on cross at least.
All right. Floyd Abrams, why did CBS fight so hard on this issue, given the fact that there were no confidential sources involved in this case?
Well, CBS fought very hard on this because it believed and believes that there's a principle at stake here. The principle is that Dan Rather doesn't work for the police, and that people that speak to Dan Rather understand that he's a journalist and not a police agent. Here we have a situation where a defendant in a case agrees to an interview with Dan Rather. It happened to be not confidential, but it was an interview with Dan Rather. If the word gets out, if the perception exists that by speaking to a CBS journalist you are therefore inevitably, immediately speaking to the police, I don't think there's any doubt but that people won't talk, and therefore the public won't learn. I mean, the idea of this is that it's a good thing for the public to hear interviews like this, and that there will be an inevitable amount of fewer interviews that people that the press talks to wind up thinking, well, it's not really a CBS correspondent. This is going right to the police. So it's a very dangerous precedent.
All right, Mr. Gray, do you see any merit in that argument from the media's point of view? Is there a competing right in your view?
Well, there'll certainly be some merit if you're talking about a confidential source. There'd be some merit if you're talking about a reporter's private notes. But the law in Texas is clear. If you interview a defendant, and what that defendant says is admissible in the courtroom. It's just a matter of Texas law as far as I'm concerned.
Well, and the principal, Floyd, did you want to say something?
I was just going to say that Mr. Gray is correct. That's why the Texas courts ordered the material released. The issue of principle, though, doesn't change. I mean, in a lot of states, as you pointed out earlier, in over 30 states, including California and New York and in lots of others, there's legal protection afforded because a decision has been made that there is a competing interest, and it's a competing interest that matters. The interest is it's a good thing to have an informed public. And the underlying theory here is that the public just will not be informed if people that talk to journalists understand that when they're doing so, it's really not a journalist they're talking to, but a policeman with a journalist press card.
That's the point I was trying to get at, Mr. Gray, which is in this case, not a confidential source, but in this case, do you recognize a competing interest there?
I'm sure there is a competing interest. The doctors say they don't want to tell what somebody tells them so they can treat a patient. The preachers say they don't want to tell what somebody tells them so they can heal their soul. Everybody says that same thing, that we have a private right that should be protected. It's probably a little over my head in terms of philosophy, but I recognize these rights, and I also recognize the right of a jury to know every fact that they can. If they've got to decide a life and death case, the jury wants to know it. The jury's asked for these transcripts.
Floyd Abrams, if this principle is so important, why in the end did CBS decide to essentially throw in the towel?
Well, CBS exhausted the Texas courts. They went from the trial court to the intermediate court to the highest court.
Was there no appeal to the federal level?
No effective appeal to the federal level. Texas law is, as Mr. Gray says, clear. The opinions in the circuit, in the Fifth Circuit where Texas is, are also clear. Unfortunately, CBS was in a position where there was simply no legal recourse at all in the place where this was going on. I was fighting very hard. I was retained to fight very hard in New York against turning over the outtakes. And the prosecution dropped its request for the actual outtakes today in the New York courts. So CBS did everything it could to resist. The question at the end of the day was, the courts having found there was no defense, a producer about to go to jail, should CBS in effect tell the producer, go to jail even though there is no law at all that we can use to get you out of jail? And that becomes an important decision. I mean, I know a lot of reporters certainly will go to jail to defend confidential sources. Some have even gone to jail for an issue like this, but I can't say that's the norm. The principle, though, remains the same. And the important thing is CBS fought hard, very hard, to protect that principle, and will fight again.
Mr. Gray, why did you drop the request for the outtakes?
Well, sir, we haven't dropped the request for the video outtapes. We dropped a subpoena for Dan Rather.
Well, I can tell you, having been in court today in New York, that the requests for the video outtakes have been dropped.
Mr. Gray?
I'll have to check into that.
All right.
The agreement I signed was drop on Dan Rather, not the video.
All right. There are shield laws in 30 states in the District of Columbia, Mr. Gray, but not in Texas. Tell us why.
Well, I don't know why. I can understand that there should be maybe some privacy and a private source that you're using. Cops feel that same need. I think I can understand that the notes of a reporter maybe should be private, but I don't believe that the statements of an accused should ever be private. Any reporter should know when you talk to a defendant that information is going to be made available to a jury.
Floyd Abrams, do you expect this to have any wider effect in other states? Will prosecutors move more vigorously, perhaps, in other states to pursue material like this?
I don't think so. I think that the very fact that CBS fought and fought and fought in Texas, in New York, were this not Texas, were this not a state where there were no protection at all, and where the law was clear on that, I think CBS and Mary Mapes and Dan Rather and all of us had a very good chance of winning. So this is an ongoing battle about an issue of principle. It is not to benefit CBS, not to benefit its reporters. On this one, the entire basis of it is this is a way to get more information, more important information to the public, and that's why so many states recognize this.
All right, Mr. Abrams, Mr. Gray, thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Still to come on the NewsHour tonight, Shields and Gigot and Agenda 2000. Margaret Warner is with Shields and Gigot.
And for our end-of-the-week political analysis, we turn, as usual, to syndicated columnist Mark Shields and Wall Street Journal columnist Paul Gigot. Mark, the new polls in New Hampshire show that Gore seems to be reversing his slide against Bradley and, in fact, gaining some ground. Now, does this jive with what you found there last week?
It does. I mean, I think it's important you put your focus exactly where it should be. National polls, in which Gore has this immense lead, are a lagging political indicator in presidential races. I mean, it's really down to two states at the outset, Iowa and New Hampshire. And the Bradley people are quick to point out that as recently as 6 months ago, Al Gore had a 33-point lead in New Hampshire. He's now battled back to the point where he has a 6-point lead in the most recent survey. So they point out that the trend has been, over a long period of time, good for them. But I don't think there's any question, through sheer effort, determination, energy, and effective campaigning, he stopped the hemorrhaging that certainly that campaign was absolutely terrified of.
Does it look that way to you? He's regaining a little of his footing.
Well, and he's doing it by a relentless assault. Day in, day out, 2-3 times a day, going after Bill Bradley. Bradley put the issue of health care on the table. Gore said, I'm for that too. And then he picks out a couple of details. Vouchers for Medicaid, saying he wants to get rid of Medicaid. And then the retirement age. Once I thought the idea you might want to raise the retirement age from 65 to 70 for the entitlements for the elderly. And now he's hammering, like Bill Clinton hammered the Republicans, and like Bill Clinton hammered Paul Tsongas in 1992. I think it shows how much Al Gore wants the job, and how when he is threatened, he goes on the attack. And I think that should be something that Bill Bradley has to respond to.
And he's also, of course, attacking just the whole cost of Bradley's health care plan. Do you think this could be an albatross for Bradley?
I don't see it as an albatross, certainly in the Democratic primaries. I mean, Richard Nixon's great advice, of course, is that you run to the right as the Republican in the primaries, into the middle in the general election once you're the nominee, and the reverse on the Democratic side. I mean, part of the Democratic debate between Bradley and Gore has been shaped by George W. Bush. Strangely enough. I mean, both Bradley and Gore are quick to point out that we're still waiting for a health plan from Governor Bush in a state where one of the 4 people are uninsured, and his credentials are pretty spotty. But because he is not what the House Republicans and the Congressional Republicans have been portrayed as, this anti-government rabid fellow, To get a hook with him and establish differences with him, there is a need to define yourself, and they have moved to
you mean a little more
more to an activist. I mean, he does not. This is a man who does not demonize government, who said there is a need, Governor Bush, for federal role in education. So the terms of the debate start off a little bit more in the middle than they had been in the past.
But how good has Bradley been in combating these attacks from Gore on the health plan?
Well, I don't think it's nearly good enough. I think he was late, and I think that he hasn't been as aggressive. Partly this was their own strategy. I think Bradley thought that somehow we've moved beyond those days when you know if you put something positive on the table, you can survive it and do better. But when Gore and his people are beating you day after day, and the way they're doing it, I don't think they're not just working on the cost. He's attacking Bradley from the left as a defender of the big three entitlements: Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. And in the way he's doing that, it's sort of the time-honored Democratic attack on Republicans. And he's basically saying about Bradley, you know, he entertained heretical thoughts that maybe these programs should be shaped up a bit. Now, there are an awful lot of people in both parties who agree with that, and Bradley entertained that thought in the Senate, but he's paying for it now in the primaries with the Democratic election.
But I mean, isn't the cost part of the hook into Bradley? He's saying it costs so much just to provide this insurance coverage for uninsured that there's nothing left for anything else.
But he uses that as a way to jump over and say, see, he'd destroy Medicare.
All right, let's switch to the Republican side.
Just one quick thing on that, and not to dissent from what Paul said. Al Gore, in every campaign, the presidential candidate begins a day, and what the candidate wants to do is speak on that candidate's issues, the issues that they're most favorable to, that they have the greatest credibility upon. What Gore has done this past week is forced Bradley to debate Gore's criticism. You can't score points on defense. And he even used Gore's own language of saying didn't stand and fight, the language that Gore had used rather ineffectually, I thought, against him for leaving the Senate. But that is the problem. And Bradley's own people were concerned in New Hampshire and elsewhere that he hadn't responded quickly enough in the Dartmouth debate to the charges on cost.
All right, and staying in New Hampshire, but this time on the Republican side, same poll showing McCain, at least one poll yesterday, showing McCain and Bush essentially neck and neck. Now, again, does that jibe with what you found? Is this mostly McCain consolidating the non-Bush vote, or is Bush also having some problems?
Well, it's Dick Bennett's poll, and he's a long-time New Hampshire pollster and has been reliable in the past, and I think he's a solid professional. There's no question that George W. has slipped back, and John McCain continues. The irony, based upon what Paul pointed out about Bill Bradley had not been attacking, and John McCain has not attacked. I mean, it's been a very positive campaign. But McCain has caught something up there, and the Bush people are nervous. There is a certain resentment on the part of New Hampshire voters that George W. Bush did skip, I think, stupidly. I think it was a big mistake on the part of the campaign. They should have had 15 debates early to the point where we would have debate fatigue. With 7 candidates in the race, you can't lay a glove on anybody. Now what they've done, by skipping those first 2 contests, competitions and debates in New Hampshire, they've raised the bar and expectations for that December 2nd. Everyone's going to be looking and saying, has he been ducking these debates because he doesn't know the capital of Norway or whatever else? And I think that was a mistake, and I think they're paying for it.
Well, I agree with that. What it's also done is given McCain a chance to spread his persona. I mean, he's been there a lot more than George W. Bush. He's stressed his resume, his career. He's had this tape of his biography that's very effective. When you see it, personal history, when you see that and you see those war things with the Vietnam War record, you know, you're very impressed. And by staying away, it means that Bush hasn't really let himself get known to the voters of New Hampshire, and I think that's what you've seen.
He's still just sort of a name.
Yes.
They don't really have a sense of who he is.
He's a name. They know in general he's done well in Texas. They know he's the son of a former president who they respect and didn't embarrass them, but they don't know what he stands for. So far it's been a personality contest, a character debate, a resume, biography contest. McCain is going to do very well in that. George W. Bush, I think the campaign is recognizing they have to come in and they have to start talking about something bigger than biography, make this about some ideas, and I think you're going to see within the next month a very big tax cut put on the table by the Bush campaign. You're going to see them try to engage on some issues.
Finally, before we go, the budget impasse finally looks like it's close to being resolved. Give us a preview of this, Mark. I mean, do you think, as the Democrats are saying, that in the end the president is going to get much of what he wanted?
I think the president will get much of what he wanted, but I think the Republicans will get out of town without being hurt. This is a party, don't forget, that began this session with essentially 3 speakers in the space of 5 weeks, with Denny Hastert, who never sought a leadership position in the Republican caucus, an untested, untried speaker. I think the fact that they're getting out, the irony is the Republican Party is unpopular. George Bush is popular. The Democrats are popular as a party. Their presidential candidates are trailing George W. Bush. All the Republican hopes reside and repose in Austin, Texas. If anything happens to George W., if he catches a cold, the Republicans have pneumonia.
Now, somehow that connects to the budget, but...
I mean, there is no Republican record in the Congress. There's nothing they can run on.
They just want to get out of town.
They want to get out of town because everything that's left on the table are Democratic issues, whether it's HMO reform, whether it's Medicare coverage of prescription drugs, campaign finance. They just soon get out.
The president's, I mean, one of the reasons is the president decided that he was going to run an election strategy. He doesn't want to get a lot of these things done. I mean, he wants a budget on his terms. He's going to get a lot of it, but the winners are the spenders in both parties. I mean, Ted Stevens, the president of the Pork Barrel Republic of Alaska, charge of the Senate Appropriation Committee. He wanted to break the spending caps they imposed in 1997. He's managed to do that. Bill Clinton wanted to break the spending caps. He agreed to in 1997. He's managing to do that. And Mark is right. The Republican Congress will get out of town without a nervous breakdown, which is with a 5-vote margin. You know, they'll all be happy about that. The biggest disappointment is going to be Dick Gephardt, the head of the Democrats in the House, who wanted a huge blow-up, a huge cataclysm that he could tar the Republicans with. He won't get it.
All right, and we're going to have to get out of this. Mark, Paul, thank you.
Finally tonight, another in our series of special emphasis discussions about the 2000 election campaign. As our regular viewers know, we've been asking a variety of individuals and groups what issues they want to hear the presidential candidates address. Gwen Eiffel taped this discussion earlier in the week.
And tonight we hear the views of 4 retired military officers who ran the graduate colleges that turn out most of this country's generals and admirals. Rear Admiral Michael McDevitt was Commandant of the National War College from 1995 to 1997. Air Force Major General Perry Smith was Commandant of the National War College from 1983 to 1986. Lieutenant General Paul Surgeon was President of National Defense University from 1992 to 1994 and Commandant of the Army War College from 1989 to 1991. And Lieutenant General Paul Van Riper served as president of Marine Corps University from 1989 to 1990. Let's start here. What are the most important issues, do you believe, Admiral McDevitt, that the presidential candidate should be talking about this year?
Well, I think what you're going to hear is the issues you'll hear about are going to be national missile defense. You're going to be hearing about readiness, and you're going to be hearing about recruiting. I'm not sure that those are the most important issues. I think the most important issue is in terms of our broader security strategy, which has to reconcile the notion of our major wars, or the 2 major theater wars that we have, humanitarian interventions, and peacekeeping and other issues associated with presence, as well as homeland defense. Those 3 major pieces are, to me, the issues that need to be addressed by the candidates, and I'm not sure that each and every one of them are addressing all 3 of those.
General Smith, do you agree with that?
I agree with that. I would add a few other things. One of the things that they've got to address is how they're going to fix the military. The military is broken in a number of dimensions. Morale is down, recruitment is down, retention is down, logistics support is down, munition support is down, training is down. All those things need to be fixed, and the military also needs a champion. They need somebody that they can look up to, that they can admire. Bill Clinton did not serve that role particularly well in a number of dimensions. And if we get that, and we debate those issues, and the constituency of the military in its broader context can find somebody who will provide that kind of leadership, then I think the military will be satisfied as we go into the next presidential candidate.
General Van Riper, one of the things that you just heard General Smith allude to was the leadership qualities of this president that we have now, and the degree to which people are looking for a different kind of leadership quality in the next chief executive. Would you agree with that?
I would agree absolutely. In fact, I think there was a long discussion that in the media today. The country as a whole is looking for a different type of leadership, more traditional.
That's an interesting point, because also in the USA Today, President Clinton was talking about the value of having had a military experience, and he said that it shouldn't necessarily hurt you not to have had it, but it definitely helps to have had it. Do you think it's important for the next, of course, all the men who are now leading in the race for president seem to have some sort of experience. Do you think that's important?
It's important, but I certainly wouldn't say it was a disqualifier. A lot of fine citizens with great experience other than the military that do very well.
General Surgeon, we hear a lot about what's important for, as far as the grand strategy for military preparedness for the next century, say. What does that mean, and what role can candidates play in talking about that and talking about what the role the military should have now?
Well, I think that the candidates have to define what the grand strategy, what the strategy is in terms of where they want to lead the United States in the next 10 years, and out of that is define the national military strategy, where the military can then take its direction in terms of where they need to go to prepare for those eventualities. I don't think I hear that being talked about in terms of strategic ideas, strategic assessments of what the world looks like, who the regional powers are, who are our peer competitors, which right now on the horizon only look to be China over the next 10 years or so. And I'd like to add to General Van Riper's comment about the whole issue of leadership. I think that character and integrity have to be the centerpiece of whoever is elected the President of the United States, because out of that emanates the leadership for not only the administrative side of the government, but I believe Congress as well, and people across the United States. We need to have a moral leader that we can look to.
Admiral McDevitt, would you like to add to that?
What is left to say, certainly the importance of leadership cannot be overemphasized. And I just would like to say that I too believe that while military experience is important to provide a context for some of the defense issues that come up, it's absolutely not necessary. I was fortunate enough to work for Dick Cheney, and here's a man with no particular military experience, but he was a tremendous leader and very effective. So you don't necessarily have had to have worn the uniform to provide the kind of credible, necessary leadership for not only the country, but for the Department of Defense.
General Smith, as the nation's next president tries to decide exactly what to do in terms of where the United States should go and what role the United States should play in a post-Cold War global situation, exactly what kinds of guideposts should he be using?
Well, it's been exactly 10 years today since the fall of the Berlin Wall, and we have not developed a new strategy to deal with this very complex situation where we're the single and sole superpower dealing with a lot of chaos and anarchy and many civil wars and micro problems around the world. We need to develop that with some specific priorities of regions and areas of interest. And if we do that, then the American people and the American military will better understand when they're called to go to duty, and will be less confusion, the morale will be higher, and I think that would enhance the situation a lot.
General Van Riper, what kinds of things would you like to see what kinds of things would you like to see these candidates talk about, not necessarily just about the military and the future of the military, but in general, what kinds of debates should they be having?
Gwen, we've touched on it. In fact, this argument about a national security strategy, in my mind, is the key. We have had no real thinking on the strategic level for almost 40 years. In fact, I would say it's a crisis in thinking. Not only have we not had the thinking, we haven't had the public debate that's so necessary. I remember as a graduate student the kind of debates we had about containment. We don't have that today. We need to get the vision from the leadership and then have a public debate as to where this country is headed.
Isn't the debate about containment sort of outpaced by the end of the Cold War?
Clearly, at the end of the Cold War, containment was no longer the national security strategy. What we failed to do is develop a coherent strategy for the future in terms of enlargement, engagement. Those aren't the type of strategies we need to be talking about. They're mere words. They're bumper stickers. No intellectual substance to most of this.
General Surgeon, what other issues are you listening for when you listen to these candidates, non-military issues, just as a citizen?
Well, I've got to go back again and agree with General Van Riper and General Smith. When you talk about national security strategy in the debate, you define the direction the United States is going to take in the next 10 to 15 years. In doing that, you also define where you want your military to be. If you look back in the last 10 years since the wall went down, as Perry brought up, we have had somewhere in the vicinity of 27 deployments around the world, where in the previous 30 years we had only had 8. Well, when you start talking about what you're doing with your military and you're employing them around the world, sooner or later you can't go to the same well all the time with the size of the force that we have. So the force has to be properly sized to meet the national security strategy.
Admiral, are we just scattering ourselves too thin, too far, and not without a goal about what it is we're trying to accomplish around the world?
Certainly that's one of the criticisms many outside observers had, and I happen to think that one of the things that needs to be brought under control is this notion of these open-ended commitments. While it's arguable whether some of the humanitarian interventions that we've made around the world, whether we should or should not do that, I happen to think in most cases we should. But by the same token, we haven't thought through the fact that we're liable to be there 10 years later. For example, the no-fly zone over Iraq that was established right at the end of Desert Storm, we're still having pilots flying that no-fly zone now, 9 years later, 10 years later, with no end in sight. It just seems to me that we need to be thinking more clearly about end states and what's the terminal point, rather than adding one commitment after another, after another, another.
General Smith, are we thinking enough about that?
No, we're not. We're not building the coalitions as much. Think about that no-fly zone we just talked about. Only the British and the Americans are flying over that no-fly zone. The Saudis are not, the Kuwaitis are not, the French are not. We need to build our coalitions better so we can get more support and have the U.S. military not so stretched so far around the world. If we could do that, we could cut down on the personnel tempo and the operational tempo, give these people a little bit of a break from their crazy lives of moving, and the military morale would go up, retention would go up, and I think the situation could be improved quite dramatically.
In a year, almost precisely a year, Americans will finally have a choice to choose among us two men who want to be president. Which General Surgeon, can you give me some sense of what you've heard so far? If you've had any sense about whether any of these candidates are talking about the issues that we're talking about today?
Very frankly, I think we're still in the early stages, and they're all trying to feel their way. I think on the Democratic side, you have two candidates who have to try to get their constituency put together, so they're not really defining the issues for the presidential campaign. On the other side of the aisle, you have a candidate who appears to be out in front with another one, McCain, coming up very close to it. So they may get to the point where they have to debate each other as opposed to look at the presidential issues. But I think that across the board, they would serve the American people better if they would define the issues for the people of the United States in terms of where we want to go strategically and how that impacts the man on the street back home. And when the man and the woman on the street back home understand where the direction is being laid out by these individuals, then I think that makes a clearer choice in who we want to elect to be president.
Admiral?
I think I don't disagree with what Paul said, but I think the reality is that defense issues are not going to be at the top of the agenda for all of the candidates. Were that we would like that to be the case, perhaps, but I think that the domestic issues, I mean, after all, I think it's still going to be the economy, stupid, and domestic issues, the one that concerns me the most, which does have a payoff in terms of the military down the road, is the issue of education. We've got to do something about improving the quality of education across the board, because we depend in the military upon educated young men and women who can handle modern and sophisticated systems, and we've got to make sure that our that the schools around the country are producing those kinds of viable members of the military.
General Van Riper?
I think the key will be the candidate, at least in my mind, who can articulate to the American public why national security is important. Put that at the top of the agenda. That's what the national government is for. The local and state governments can handle many of these other issues, and we've had a failure in that in the past. I don't believe the American public knows what is in our national security strategy today. The fact it's no longer just the vital interest, but also has been added as important interest, which is kind of a catch-all. And third, humanitarian operations. Those are things our national strategy says today, and it's been done in a closed shop.
Thank you, gentlemen, all.
A reminder that you can participate in our Agenda 2000 project by visiting our website at pbs.org/newshour, and also by regular mail. Send it to The NewsHour, Box 2626, Washington, D.C. 20013. Again, the major stories of this Friday. 6 rockets exploded near the U.S. Embassy and a United Nations building in Pakistan. There were no Americans among the 6 people injured, and no one has claimed responsibility. 3 people were wounded when a powerful bomb went off outside a mosque in Afghanistan, and a strong earthquake rocked western Turkey, killing at least 120 and injuring hundreds more. We'll see you online and again here Monday evening. Have a good weekend. I'm Ray Suarez. Thank you and good night.
Imagine a system that produces and distributes food and helps improve nutrition and health here and abroad. Who is building such a global network?
And by Solomon Smith Barney.
What will happen in Cuba after Castro? Opportunities abound, and every day we look at them through a microscope. Solomon Smith Barney. Success is earned.
And by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by the annual financial support from viewers like you.
On tomorrow's Weekend Edition, it's breaking news, in-depth interviews, political analysis, and maybe even a few laughs. Join us for Weekend Edition from 5 to 10 a.m. on OPB Radio.
Video cassettes of the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer are available from PBS Video. Call 1-800-328-PBS-1.
This is PBS.
Funding for local broadcast of the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer has been provided by viewers like you. And by the following.
D.A. Davidson and Company, an investment firm serving the individual investor since 1935.
Hi, I'm Charlie Rose, and I am delighted that my faithful viewers in Oregon will now be getting an extra hour of sleep each night. Due to your support, Charlie Rose is now on Oregon Public Broadcasting every weeknight at 11 p.m. Same great guest, same insightful content. So please join me tonight at 11 on OPB.
At the edge of the American continent, at the heart of the American dream, there is a city that forever asks, can all the peoples of the world live together in one place? The city is New York. From filmmaker Rick Burns comes a special presentation of the American experience, New York.
On OPB, Sunday at 9.
Surprising discoveries from the world of antiques. It's an extremely important part of American history. I hope that you never sell it. I hope that you keep it together in your family.
But it's a nice example of a Syrian chair.
Wow, really?
I mean, we'd have to sit down and start adding it all up, but you have thousands of dollars worth of buttons on this table.
We tell these stories every week on the Antiques Roadshow. This week from Kansas City, Missouri.
On OPB, Monday at 8.
Today, you have become teachers. In your hands is our nation's future. Yet it will not be enough simply to make them learn. You must make them